All right, let's talk about the best bows and save the world. Now, before I get into it, I have a couple of disclaimers, and one of them, of course, is the fact that obviously they may or may not be done releasing bows to this game, but of course they are not done adding any of the other weapon types to the game, and I made those videos anyway, but we did get confirmation from Epic that they are, as of now, pretty much done with all the bows because they wanted to make one for every set, which they still haven't technically done, but I imagine any winter set would probably come in like, well, the winter time, and it's May, so I think it's going to be a very long time before they release any bows, but a lot of people are really curious right now, which of these 12 bows is the best one that I should use, and we're going to get to that later. Now, of course, I will be covering any future bows that come out, so if none of these bows are one of the bows that comes out in the future, then rest assured you can check my channel or search it up with my name. I have most likely covered it, usually upon release, so if there's a new bow that's not in this video, I've probably got you covered anyway, and I can, of course, talk about it in its own video. And the other thing that I wanted to get out of the way is the perks for this. This is not a best perks video. I have made a best perks video for all of these bows. I will admit, as of release, some of these videos might need updating, so you might want to check the links below, see if I've changed that video. For example, one of them I'll say right off the bat is the vacuum tube bow. This was a very, very different weapon day one of release. This 6 perk didn't even function the way that it did. In fact, they actually changed it to work more like I recommended it should work rather than how it did when it first released, and I'm very, very grateful for that. I don't know if they ever saw my video, but they literally did exactly what I wanted them to do, because initially it was upon elimination, it would branch out to up to 6 enemies, maybe not always 6 enemies, and that had a 4-second cooldown. I said that it should just hit as many enemies as possible up to 6, you know, always try to hit that 6, and it was upon every single hit, which is literally exactly what they did, and that is why the vacuum tube bow is actually quite a bit stronger than it used to be, and that's how my original video might be a little bit wrong, but the best perks for all of these is actually very standard. This is not true for every single bow, but fundamentally, double damage is going to be a lot more consistent. Reload is something I can recommend on every single bow that can have it, and crit is something I do a lot because most bows will one-shot a target anyway. They're very strong weapons, depending on your power level and your missions, of course, and for the bigger targets, you're never really going to kill them in 2 shots, so long as you're going to take at least 3 shots, by then you would have crit anyway, and that's my mentality beyond running crit for a lot of these, especially with the powder keg that I'm looking at right here, or the Xenon bow. These bows are very, very frequently hitting multiple targets at once, where crits are plentiful. Now, of course, I've noticed in-game that when the Xenon bow doesn't crit, kind of sucks. I don't love that, and that's where a double damage loadout might be good, but I will just recommend you to be vigilant. Check out my videos on these. Think for yourself for all of the bows that I show here, because you might not agree with the perks, and some of these are, of course, not even made properly, and with bows like the Instigator, I was given a copy of these to show for today's video. And on that topic, I do want to thank Benz for pretty much all of these. I literally just DM'd him that I wanted to make a best bows videos. He was like, okay, cool, and then he just like drop, literally gave me a copy of like every single bow. You can see him sprinkled throughout here because he was one of the friends of mine who maxed out a copy of every single one of these and was very helpful. I have multiple perks for a lot of these, and that is so that I can get into it now. One more thing before we get into it, I do have a video on the best bow loadout. I'm going to link that in the description below. This is what I use personally, but there are other options, and I'd highly recommend checking out that video so I can explain exactly why I use what I use and how this build works. Let's start with the boom bow, the only bow that I haven't made a video on. This was not released at a time when I was making videos on all these new weapons, which I greatly regret, and I should be covering a boom bow later on. If it is covered in a future time, I will be linking that in the description below, of course, but the boom bow is everybody's go-to bow when they think about, you know, bows and save the world, because it was the first one added, it was coming over from Battle Royale, and it's not incredibly amazing compared to some that have come out later, and it is lacking a reload perk, which is a major knock, but fire rate has been added to the game, and it makes it quite a little bit better. Fire rate for all of the bows, if you were curious, does make it so that it gets to its max charge faster, and almost every single bow has a hidden feature, some of them not so hidden, where they do the most damage when they're fully charged, and for some bows that difference is more than others, but you can get up to 2 or 3 times the normal damage by charging it all the way to the max, and with the boom bow you can hit multiple targets at once. While its radius is a bit lower than the powder keg, it is very, very effective in crowd clearing, and that makes it a secure contender for one of the better bows in the entire game. Moving on to the Cloudburst, I'm going alphabetical here. This is a bow that's really, really good for killing a single target, and I think their intent with this bow is it to be, you know, decent with crowd clearing, seeing as an elimination can cause a cloud of steam, but that has a 5-second cooldown, and that cloud of steam is not only tough to control because enemies don't always walk into it, but it's not insanely big, and nor is it doing a ton of damage, so I've never really seen the Cloudburst as a phenomenal weapon, but I'm going to let you decide for yourself. This was great for for a while because it was bugged with Pharah's ability, where it was making it, branch out to other enemies. And it's probably good that I mentioned Pharah, because on bow hit, the arrows can splinter off, dealing extra damage to extra targets, and that is now on only a bow's hit, so it doesn't actually splinter off with the cloud. But the cloud burst is kind of just that. It's a very mediocre weapon. I think you can use it, especially if you're in the lower zones. That's true for all of these bows, however, and I don't see a lot of use out of it, but maybe it'll get better in the future. The Compression Burst Servant is kind of just a weaker boom bow in my experience. It is a bow that got a lot better with that fire rate perk because it has a very slow draw, but a very high extra damage when you charge it all the way to max, and also the highest impact of any of the bows as well. So this is Editing Beast coming in after to tell you that this is a very, very good weapon for knocking enemies around. So you might not want to be specifically using this for damage. In certain specific situations, you can roll it all impact and try to knock some smashers around, maybe impact some enemies. You'll see in my gameplay later on, some of the enemies actually, instead of attacking me, will get stunned on the ground and you'll get a bit of a second shot. So I don't personally value impact all that much. If you've been watching my videos for a long time, I hardly ever mention it because I very rarely see it as something that actually changes the flow of a mission in any meaningful way, but it is one of its selling points and I figured I should mention it. And it has like I think a very similar radius as the boom bow, and it doesn't quite explode as satisfyingly, but it does do essentially the same thing. You have a nice little draw time, and then it killed zombies in a mass group. It's nice to have, and I think it's kind of outclassed by the boom bow, but all in all, it is very, very effective at what it does if you don't have the boom bow. So it's something that you can try out if you want to use it, but I'd also recommend a fire rate perk on that so you can pop off as many shots as possible. Now the Nightfire is up, and this is from the Medieval set, which is interesting because it has a very unique ability where hitting an enemy can regenerate shields, which is nice if you're not using Blast from the Past. I'd highly recommend using the Nightfire with Totally Rockin' Out if you want to maximize its ability to, well, heal your shields. One thing I want to note is that I will be using Totally Rockin' Out for some of the bows that don't have very good area of effect damage, so like the Nightfire, the Love Song, the Night Owl, etc. I will be using Totally Rockin' Out for these, which I do understand buffs the damage way more than Blast from the Past, and I know that it'll look like these bows are a lot better than they are, but I figured it was fair to give them their nice little representation on the screen here because they aren't that good at taking out large crowds of zombies, and you sort of need Totally Rockin' Out to make them at all viable. But if you're using Blast from the Past, that 6 perk is going to be totally wasted, but the Nightfire isn't all bad because it's really, really good at popping off a lot of shots very quickly. It has a very, very quick draw time, and it makes it very easy to use in a high-octane mission, and you can pop off a lot of shots, which is very, very nice to have, and its damage is pretty decent to go along with it, so I'd say this is an extremely good mid-range bow. You can get off a lot of shots to make up for its low damage, but ultimately it's not going to be hitting quite as hard as some of our bigger weapons, and unfortunately it can really only hit one target at a time, meaning all of your extra damage is coming from Stoneheart Pharah, which you should absolutely be using with any bow. As with any bow, and I'm going to be saying this a lot in the future, is if you don't have area of effect damage, it's really kind of a backseat weapon. Like, you really shouldn't be using it unless you have, no other option and you really want to use a bow, because without hitting multiple targets, it is definitely a drawback. I'm going to be mentioning the Xenon bow later, but that is where this weapon shines as one of the strongest bows in the game because it does about as much damage as any other bow, except that it can shoot through as many zombies as you want and through walls, which makes this thing phenomenal, but we're not quite there yet. We're talking about the Nightfire. I think it's a great option. I think it's very good, but unfortunately, without the area of effect damage, it's kind of a mid-range bow. The Love Song, my favorite weapon to hate because, like I've said before, anytime I get to use Selena Gomez in not only the thumbnail but the footage, I'm having a great day, trust me. But the Love Song was not the source of that enjoyment. It's kind of just a slower firing average weapon. It just has a very typical draw speed, it does very typical damage, and its 6 perk is meant to be useful in that it can stun an enemy for 10 seconds when you charge it all the way, but that takes a long time to charge unless you have fire rate, and that stun is not insanely necessary. It helps you do extra damage, especially if you can do the damage to knock back, stun, stagger kind of deal. But that doesn't really save it because, like I said, with the Nightfire, it doesn't have any area of effect damage, meaning you'd be carrying an entire weapon just to do extra damage to a Mist Monster after the second hit. And I mentioned Mist Monsters because they're basically the only thing that's going to survive that first hit, which means it's a very decent weapon for single target damage. But other than that, it's very, very unexceptional, and I don't know that I have talked to anybody who's gotten any use of this weapon outside of the day one release when we were testing it out. Hopefully this weapon gets buffed in the future, but unfortunately, it is kind of a lower range weapon weapon, and I don't think it's up there with some of the better bows in the game. Now, the Night Owl is going to get a very similar treatment to me as the Love Song. It doesn't have any area of effect damage, and eliminating 2 enemies can reduce your health by X amount, and that'll turn into a little bit of extra damage, but that's not going to be saving this weapon, unfortunately, because bows are already tricky to use, and having it hurt you in the process isn't going to help much. I, in the past, have been one of the few fans of the Black Metal set. I think it's really, really cool that you can turn, you know, a loss of health into extra damage. If you use coconuts and Blast from the Past and you stay on top of that health reduction, that can be okay. That can be just fine. Obviously, with this weapon, it'll do lots more damage with the less health that you have, but that's not really going to save this weapon, especially considering it's locked to physical and fire, which can be good as of recording this. This will be not true in the future, of course, but nature missions are very common right now, so fire can be nice to use this weapon in if you are trying to make a bow for every element. Maybe the Night Owl could be your fire bow. Maybe that could be dedicated for it. And the Vacuum Tube bow could be your nature bow. You know, you see where I'm going with this? There isn't a dedicated water one, though, unfortunately, so you're going to have to figure that last one out for yourself, but the Night Owl might not want to be on that roster anyway, just because, yeah, it's got mediocre damage, and it hurts you in the process, which gives it extra damage, which could be nice, make up for that lower damage, but it's not exactly going to be getting too much favoritism for me, and that's where I'm going to class this as sort of a bottom half bow. Now, the Scrap Shot is a fun one, because I'm going to talk about the Scrap Shot and the Instigator at the exact same time, because the Scrap Shot doesn't have any special 6 perk, but as far as I'm aware, it's the same thing as the Instigator. I have very different perks on this, so I can't really compare it apples to apples, but you can kind of trust me when at the base level, these are like the exact same weapon, so they basically are going to be talked about at the same time. The Instigator is very good for, on that max charge, it'll allow enemies to take extra damage, but that's very similar to the Love Song, and like I said, that didn't save the Love Song, and it doesn't really save the Instigator. It doesn't affect bosses, which as far as I'm aware only means the Storm King. So it only means that it doesn't affect the Storm King, because it's the only boss in the game. Mini bosses, as far as I'm aware, at least didn't count for this on day 1. If I'm wrong about that, let me know, but if you can use this to make mini bosses take more damage, that can be nice, but it's kind of like a low-budget war cry in that respect. I don't know. Up to you guys. I have never found that to be useful or necessary, but it can be kind of a thing, especially as of release. Chrome Husks are a very big problem, and while that won't be true forever, it can be very, very good at helping you and your team eliminate enemies that are harder to take down, but ultimately, the Scrap Shot and the Instigator both suffer from what some of the other bows have, where they don't have any area of effect damage. They are very, very good at taking out single targets. They have very decent fire rate. You can pop off a lot of shots very quickly. You can get to that max charge fairly quick because of how fast these weapons are, and maybe fire rate can help you with that, but ultimately, if you can't hit lots of targets, this can't be your primary. It's just very, very tough to use it that way, and you will be holding back your team. So, unfortunately, I have to class these weapons in the lower half, but I've been saying that a lot, and that's because our best weapons are to come next. I'm going to jump ahead to the Vindertech Seeker because I want to talk about the best bows last, and I know that's going to be a kick to the gut for some of you guys. I know that there are some serious Vindertech Seeker fans out there. This weapon is one of the most impacted by the fire rate changes, where you can get to that max draw very, very quickly, and you can fire off, 3 extra charges that can seek out enemies, and that's kind of the Seeker part of it. Because of that, you can do a lot of extra damage to a single target. This very well may be the hardest hitting single target bow in the entire game, which makes it very, very effective at taking out mist monsters and mini bosses, but because it takes so long to get to that max charge in the past, I haven't really been able to see this as my primary weapon. With fire rate, this weapon can be a little bit more viable and definitely usable in game, but I think we have some better bows, starting with the Powder Keg. The Powder Keg is where we're going to be talking about the upper half of bows. The Powder Keg, Xenon Bow, and the Vacuum Tube Bow are the 3 bows that I've been using as my primaries, because the Powder Keg is a huger explosion than the Boom Bow, and I do mean huger because it is huge. That thing can affect tons of enemies in one explosion. Its base damage is very low. This does significantly less than most of the other bows, and that's because that explosion makes up for it all the way. What I've been doing with bigger targets is I'll just spam a lot of shots from this thing and blow up as many times as I can, and that will be very, very effective at even taking out mini bosses. It's great for encampments and fantastic for crowds of zombies, which is what you'll be seeing a lot of in Save the World, and it makes it perfectly suited to be the right tool for that job. I've been running it fire because that's kind of what I wanted. I don't know, it feels like an explosion of a powder keg should be a fire bow, and that's kind of what I went with, and that's very, very good, seeing as most of the enemies are nature right now, and that will of course not be true in the future, like I said, but that is how I've been running it, and I am very, very satisfied with it. I think the powder keg is one of the best bows in the entire game. Now the Vacuum Tube Bow. bow. I've given it enough praise. As you can see, mine is double damage. You can obviously go crit rating on this. Again, this isn't a best perks video. That's just what I have. And the vacuum tube bow is phenomenal. That extra zap damage is very, very good at affecting lots of extra enemies, because you need to think of it like this. You are affecting 6 extra enemies with a zap. Pharah's hitting, I think, 5 extra enemies. With plus your initial target, you're hitting a dozen enemies per shot with this thing, and it is very, very good at sweeping crowds of enemies. It hasn't been getting a lot of use recently because there haven't been that many water missions, but if you have a water modifier where you're going to be against frost enemies, you know, water enemies, this thing will do its maximum damage, and it's going to be a very, very, very fun time because it's going to be hitting lots and lots of enemies all in one shot. A lot of people are going to have a sore taste in their mouth because this weapon did just get, a lot of people are saying nerfed, but really it was fixed. Its ability was like the Cloudburst bow, where all of those zaps from the electricity was affecting Pharah's ability, so they were also hitting 5 more enemies on top of that, which means it was really hitting more like 30 enemies rather than 6, and that's not, I think, what Epic was intending. And you could wipe out entire encampments in like 2 shots if there wasn't healing death burst. So I think that a lot of people think this weapon is a lot worse than it really is because it just went from god tier to, like, you know, normally very good. And that's where I'm going to say it is normally very good. This is, in my opinion, a top 5 bow, no doubt. And you should definitely consider leveling this up. If you have it, pull it out of the collection book, you know, use code MISTA if you're going to be using V-Bucks for that. But this is a very, very good bow and something you should definitely try out. Last, but definitely not least, is something I have said on record might very well be the best bow in the game, and I don't want to hype it any more than that because it's not. There is no best bow. If you've been paying attention so far, you'll realize that I don't rank these weapons. I don't think that you can compare a lot of these weapons, but I do believe that the Xenon bow might just be a contender for that #1 slot because of its range and the fact that it can shoot through freaking everything, and I do mean everything. You could go through an entire encampment of zombies, through a wall, through a tree, through the ground, and into another encampment of zombies, because this arrow will go until it hits the edge of the map, because it is just that cool. The Xenon bow has effectively infinite pierce. It can go through as many targets as you want, and because of that, you're hitting way more targets than the other bows. Like I mentioned, the powder keg has that huge explosion, and the vacuum tube bow can hit up to a dozen enemies, but the Xenon bow, it can hit, if you think of it like this, you can shoot through a crowd of zombies, hitting maybe 10 enemies at once, and each one of those zombies will be activating Pharah's ability to branch out to more zombies. You could hit, in that instance, about 50 enemies, so to speak, or 50 times with one shot. Not to mention, you don't have to worry about lining up a shot. You can aim ahead of an enemy without feeling like you're going to be hitting the ground, because it's just going to go right through it. You don't need to worry about that tree or that car or that wall in front of you. You can shoot wherever the target is. Half the time when I'm using the Xenon bow, I'm aiming at health bars. There's no piece of the environment that's going to get in your way, and that makes it an extraordinarily versatile weapon, and I have never been more satisfied using a weapon because I feel like the Xenon bow is limitless. I have gone a bit far there. I don't want you to think that I am overhyping this weapon. It's a personal favorite. A lot of this is coming out of opinion, but I like to be objective in these reviews. So I guess I should stop hyping it there. I'm just saying that when you could shoot through literally anything and the weapon's doing good damage while it's at it, boy, you've got a recipe for disaster there. You can see that I've been running this with fire rate since the changes because you can get to that max charge faster, which more or less means you can shoot more accurately, and that's true for every single bow in the game. I want that to be understood. If you put fire rate on any of these bows, they will whip up to their max accuracy faster, and it makes it a little bit more easy to use. I was using damage to afflicted down here, which was nice, and that may be something I use in the future, but I think I'm satisfied with fire rate right now. I'm not entirely certain on that. But that just about wraps up the current best bows in Save the World. I hope this was good for you guys. I hope I wasn't too biased in any of these. I try to be objective, just laying out exactly how these bows work, why they're good for all of their unique reasons. You have a lot of options here. I really think there is a playstyle for everybody here. I did not cover crossbows. I should have mentioned that at the beginning, but I don't think crossbows really have a place on this list. They're a very different weapon, and even Epic has been treating them differently because they are, well, they're very different weapons, and none of them are very good anyway, so trust me, you're not missing out on any information there, but that's where I'm going to call it. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you guys so much for watching. These videos do take a lot of effort, so if you appreciate my hustle here, please use creator code MISTA to check out. Like the video if you liked it, dislike if you disliked it, comment below what you think. I want to know what you guys are thinking. You know, subscribe if you're new, and of course check out my other weapon guides if you're interested. All of them will be linked in the description below, so you can check them out there. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a nice day. And then